Hello and welcome back to Tinker Talks Guns. Before we get started, I'd like to say if you want to support me on Patreon, these videos all cost money, and it would be very helpful if you'd kick a buck or two a month my way. There's a link in the description below, and you can support me on Patreon. Also, these videos are available on utreon.com, where if you care to pay for the privilege, you can subscribe to me and also help out. So, Remington 1858 Army was a hell of a good cap and ball revolver, which did not stop Remington from introducing a metallic cartridge conversion of it approximately 5 seconds after the Roll and White patent on bored-through cylinders wore out. And originally those were like modern adapters where there's just a separate plate, a bored-through cylinder with a separate plate that holds the cartridges in place, usually with a firing pin for every chamber. The original Remingtons just had a slot in the edge because 46 Remington was a rimfire cartridge, but they did introduce centerfire versions of it at a later date. And in modern times, Kirst and Howell both make the original style backplate type, made for centerfire cartridges, usually 45 Colt. And like the Remington, they're 5-shooters because, well, there was room for 6 44 caliber chambers. And once you bored it out, there was not really room for 6 45 caliber metallic cartridges with the bullets seated inside. So you can also get a Kirst gated conversion, which are quite nice, and though not inexpensive, and work very well indeed. A few years ago, Duelist 1854, or Duelist 1954? I'll have to look that up. Anyway, he has a gun channel where he does a lot of cool stuff with 19th century style guns and modern guns, and I'll put a link to that in the description below also. Duelist decided he wanted a Bulldog Remington, a Remington snubby. That was interesting. I'm getting a low battery warning. Fantastic. A Remington snubby. And he got a Kirst converter, Kirst gated conversion, and he cut the barrel off at 2 inches and came up with something similar to this. Except his had a set screw to hold the cylinder access pin in. You can also now buy a little lever that mounts to this screw that will hold the cylinder pin in. And I found both of those solutions somewhat inelegant, although I was quite entranced with the idea of a Bulldog and was determined to do one of my own, which I did. And here it is. And you can see it's, I've turned it into a bird's head grip and all the usual cartridge conversion stuff. We'll get into that on the tabletop. Okay, so to unload or load the gun, of course, you cock the hammer to half cock, just as you normally would, and fill the holes with cartridges. Not complicated, and of course you can see it's unloaded. Now, I turned the cylinder out of, this is not a turned down cap and ball cylinder. This is a cylinder that I made fresh from half-hard 4140, which is pretty typical for revolver cylinders. And to get the holes lined up, I first cut the locking notches, which were cut, as you can probably tell, with a cutoff wheel and a Dremel tool. A Fordham tool, actually, but that's, you know, what Dremels want to be when they grow up. And then I would simply lock the cylinder in place and go down the bore with a sheathed drill and drill out much of the cylinder, and then go back with the proper size bit, bore through and ream the cylinder. That way, every single cylinder lines up perfectly with its notch. Now, as a consequence of this, I did not get them perfectly centered, perfectly spaced, but it still works perfectly because they were all bored in line with the bore, line boring. Now, typically, when Duelist 1854 made his first one of these, and it's the first one I'm aware of, He put a set screw in here to keep the cylinder pin in place, because normally that's held in place by the loading lever, and his did not have a loading lever. You can now buy a little lever that mounts to this screw, spring-loaded, and will hold the access pin in place. But those always looked ungainly to me. So when I decided to set about making my own, I tried to figure out a better way to do it. And I shortened the loading lever. And normally this clip retains it in a lug on the barrel out at the front. But since if I put a lug on the barrel here, it would prevent the cylinder pin from moving more than about that much, I couldn't do that. So I relocated the latch. I bored out and grooved this and put a spring in there so that you have the latch here instead of at the front, and it engages a slot cut in the front of the cylinder pin. So with this dropped, you just push it up, make sure it catches, and you're good to go. I also had to put a front sight on this, so I made one that sort of, I don't know, fit my aesthetic sensibilities, and gave it a little orange coloring, which is scraping off from use, to make it easier to sight. And the sights, of course, are just a groove in the frame and that little tiny front sight. Despite that, it's quite accurate enough, and it works pretty good overall. Now, the butt, you'll notice, is a bird's head grip, which, to the best of my knowledge, no one ever did to a full-size gun like this in the 19th century. Okay. Little screwdriver porn. And you can see the grip panels come right off, and there was just enough meat in the square butt frame for me to round it off into a nice bird's head. So, simple and pretty easy. Then, of course, I just shaped the grips to match the grip frame. So, disassembly. Open this, pull out the cylinder access pin, bring the gun to half cock, and it doesn't come out because the firing pin hits the frame. So you have to take a little screwdriver or something like it, push the firing pin in, lower the hammer. Wow. This, of course, has never been this difficult when I wasn't doing a video. And then if you lower the hammer, it pops right out. My God, you'd think this would be easy. I've done it so many times. Anyway, so as you can see, the cylinders are pretty close but not perfectly spaced, or the chambers rather, of the cylinder. These two holes on the back were intended as places to rest the firing pin between cartridges, so it could be carried safely with 5 cartridges, and they don't work because the firing pin isn't long enough. It's a process of trial and error. It's often a trial and usually an error. The base plate has a relief cut here for the hand that advances the cylinder. And, of course, a spring-loaded firing pin to detonate the cartridges. And this relief cut here is so that when the gun is in half cock, this piece can push past, once the firing pin's in, this piece can push past the projecting hand. And rather than going the full diameter of the cylinder, I made this one to match the frame, because that way, when there are cartridges in place, you can see the rims and know that the gun is loaded. And I did cut these notches so that you can easily pry the cartridge out. Put it back together. Of course, you have to press in the firing pin, just like you did to remove it, so it clears the frame. And then it clicks into place, and run in the cylinder pin, snap it shut, and you are ready to go to half cock and load and go. And despite the fact that I cut these cylinder notches with a tool, not the correct way, most of the cylinders are extremely tight, but there's a little play in some of them, certainly well within acceptable limits, and really not much different than you'd find on some new revolvers. The grips are just the original grips that I rounded off to match the frame. So, there you have it. This is one of those guns that I made because, frankly, I relished the challenge and I thought it would be cool to have one, and it is. Although, in practical terms, this is in no way, shape, or form a practical gun in the modern world unless you do cowboy action shooting. But I love it, and I take it out and shoot it moderately regularly when primers are available so that I can make the ammo for it. And it's just a project that I'm very satisfied with, despite having learned enough that I would do a much better job today if I cared to. But great gun, a lot of fun, great conversation piece. Now, if you like the video, please hit like and subscribe. That helps YouTube acknowledge that I'm here and spread these videos around so more people see them. And commenting in the comment section is also helpful. Anyway, so I hope this finds you well. Stay safe, take care, and we'll talk to you again real soon.